Well, welcome to a special edition Deep Look podcast. We're reporting live in the Ultiworld Discord. It is 9:45 p.m. Eastern Time on Friday after day one of Nationals. And Charlie Eisen alongside Keith Rayner. We've got some special guests as well coming up. If you want to get in touch with us in the chat, you can roll over the channel, hit the chat box icon, and we will take your questions and get your thoughts. Keith, an exciting first day of action, a windy, kind of hot, cold in the morning, hot in the afternoon, kind of a day out there. Some interesting upsets, but also a lot of the good teams looking good.
That is kind of what we expected. We've had a whole season to gather the data, and there were a couple of surprises, of course, as there always are going to be. And then there's a little bit of nuance. Sometimes teams can win and you're still a little concerned about them. Sometimes a team can lose and you can write it off. So there is a little bit more to it than just, okay, X team won and Y team lost. But for teams that are around the margins, those wins and losses are actually what matter more than what you actually think of the team's ability to compete. If you're in the margin for making the bracket, or you're at the margin for contending for a title, and suddenly now you're on UNC's side in the quarterfinals, then it's going to affect your chances, and it won't matter how good you are. It matters what your record looks like.
Everybody played 2 games today. Your remaining undefeated team, starting in the men's division, UNC at the top of Pool A, UMass at the top of Pool B, including beating Brown, Cal Poly SLO and Carleton both undefeated in Pool C. And in Pool D, Texas and Pittsburgh both undefeated. Pittsburgh getting a nice win over Colorado in the final round of the day. In the women's division, UNC in Pool A, Colorado in Pool B, UBC and UCSB are undefeated in Pool C, and Vermont and Oregon undefeated in Pool D. That's where things stand. Colorado women should not be undefeated, though. And we're going to welcome in Ultiworld D1 women's editor Jenna Weiner to talk a little bit about that and what she saw the rest of the day. Stanford should have won that game, Jenna.
They were up by 3 late and then 4 straight points from Laundry. I don't really know exactly how it happened. Our D1 Women's reporter, Bridget Meisner, was there watching the game. The takeaway is that once Colorado stopped beating themselves, it turns out that they are, on paper, talent-wise, a better team than Stanford, and that showed in the final 4 points. But they escaped just barely. And Keith, your pick, nearly there.
And almost in the way I said it, like sometimes being the more talented team is not enough to win against the smart team that knows how to execute. Oh, God, daggers. I feel like in the huddle, Colorado was literally calling me out. Like they were in the middle of the huddle and they're like, we can't let Keith's pick be right. That's that guy. And then they went at it and drove a dagger directly into my heart.
Jenna, what else did you see today, kind of as you take a big picture, holistic view at day one?
I mean, I think in the women's division, like we might have expected, there weren't many upsets. In fact, only 2, the most notable of which came in the final round of the day. Georgia Athena upsetting the Northeastern Valkyries. Quincy Booth is incredible. Just a rookie, 11 assists on 14 goals for Georgia.
That is insane. I thought Jolie Krebs had the stat line of the day, but I think that takes it.
So that's my follow-up, because the other upset of the day was seeing Binghamton beating Colorado State Hells Bells. That was 12-13 matchup, so not a huge upset, but Krebs, 2 goals, 9 assists, 4 blocks. Those 2 going today in the 2 upsets. And Binghamton had an early lead against Washington Element, fell just short, 11-9. But Binghamton, first win for the Metro East in non-consolation play in years.
12 years it's been since Ottawa did it in 2011.
That if they had beat Washington, that would have been a bracket buster. Like that's your headline news for the day. But it's sure not a big upset by seed for them to beat Colorado State, but they're for the freaking Metro East, so it is a big deal.
It really does feel like a big deal. It felt like big news at the fields when we heard that today. Men's division action. We welcome in D1 men's editor Edward Stevens. Edward, what did you see out there today?
Well, we had 6 undefeated teams, but I want to set Carleton and Texas to the side here. They both were 3 seeds in their pools and cleaned up against the lower 2 seeds. So we'll see what they bring in tomorrow. But the real takeaway from the other undefeated teams, UNC in Pool A, Cal Poly SLO in Pool C, UMass in Pool B, and Pittsburgh in Pool D, is that right now, those 4 teams look like they have the inside track to semifinals. And it's not just because of the fact that they haven't taken any losses and are set up well to actually get the bye into quarters and stay rested. It's because they look like, particularly UNC, UMass, and SLO, they look like the deepest 3 teams at the tournament. And Pittsburgh, I have to say they don't look quite as deep, but they look just as dangerous because they're so good on the top end with Ng and Yarder and Heyman in particular, all having great days today. So, we talked about whether Colorado could be in that group, whether Vermont could be in that group, and those and Brown, and those teams played well-ish, but they fell in those 1-2 pool matchups that we saw all of today in convincing fashion. And I wouldn't be shocked at all if when we get to semis, we're looking at UNC, Cal Poly SLO, UMass. I'd be a little more surprised with Pittsburgh. I don't think they're going to walk it in. They're looking a little vulnerable, especially early in the day against Washington. But those top 3 teams, they look like they are prepped, deep, strong, and ready to make a deep run.
I got to say, Vermont, they look bad against Cal Poly SLO. A team, of course, that gave them trouble back at Easterns. I don't know if you got a chance to watch much of that game, but they seem to really not have answers against a team that plays a good, junky defense and doesn't give them kind of the offensive flow that they're used to.
Well, not only that, you're definitely right about that, but also something that we've seen from this Vermont team going back to the beginning of the season is that as good as they can be, we've seen their ceiling. They also throw up some real clunkers of games. They started the first game of the season in Florida warm-up, just absolutely coughing away a game against Texas.
I feel like I've watched all their worst games.
Yeah, you might have, and they've had some great games in there too, but you can't get through a weekend like that having worse games. And you know what? Maybe they got it out of the way against Cal Poly SLO, and they're ready and they're refocused. But that's a worry about that team going forward. Consistency is one of the keys to excellence, and we don't have it right now from that team. The other really interesting thing I have from an undefeated team right now is looking at Carleton sitting at 2-0. Yeah, they played the lower 2 seats, but they're doing it without the big news. Declan Miller is injured and out for the tournament. He got injured at some point before the tournament began, and so Carleton has had to do it without their just consensus best player. Colin Baker seems to be having a fantastic tournament so far. Daniel Chen is doing really well. Leo Zhao and Finn Furman are cleaning up for them. So it's interesting to see this young team step up and play up without their star.
And speaking of stars, you talked a little bit about Pittsburgh, who's undefeated, and got through some of the tougher tests in their pool. They still have Texas waiting for them, but they did it really on the back of that top end. Aiden Landis also heavily involved today, and it's not necessarily a strategy we've seen from Pittsburgh in quite some time to ride their stars so heavily. But I think they're kind of tying their fate to okay, can these guys hold up over the long run? Can these guys hold up over the term? But far and away, Henry Ng was the best player I saw today in the men's division. He was more or less untouchable, and they just are okay, we'll put it out there as much as we can, and that's enough a lot of times to beat teams. And Tristan Yarder's playing both ways. They're getting a lot of two-way reps from a lot of guys, and is that sustainable for them?
Why hook your chariot to a horse when you can hook it to a comet? They've got it. Spend it. I like to see it. I think they actually have to play that way, and I expect it to occur more and more, particularly once they get into the bracket.
Well, when we look ahead to tomorrow, we've got rest of pool play, and then we're in pre-quarters, 5:30 p.m. tomorrow afternoon. Set aside pre-quarters. We know that's going to be exciting. We're in the bracket. It's elimination play. What's coming up in pool play that we need to be watching for? Jen, I'll let you go first.
I think for me, the biggest thing is looking at that pre-quarters cut line. Because to Edward's point, there are some teams that are sitting at undefeated records, Lona's division in Santa Barbara and Oregon. that were 3 seeds and have played the bottom 2 seeds. It's a matter of figuring out where do those teams stack up when they play the top 2 teams in their pool, because unless they win out, we're likely to see those teams in pre-quarters where if they finish third in their pool, they might draw a really tough matchup, and that's going to make it really hard for those teams to overcome and make it further into the bracket if they don't get a favorable pre-quarters matchup. So even if some teams are sitting at 2-0 or potentially favorable positions going into pre-quarters, if they have any ambitions of moving further in the tournament, like towards quarters or even semifinals, we're going to learn a lot about those sort of middle tier teams tomorrow when they play some of the top competition in their pools.
Got to get sharpened up for pre-quarters. Going to be some tough pre-quarters for sure. Edward, how about you?
I'm looking at 2 things. I'm looking into Pool A and Pool D. I'll start with Pool A. I don't think North Carolina is going to have any problems tomorrow staying at the top and winning out and getting their bye, but I have no idea how the next 4 places are going to finish. UC Santa Cruz beat Tufts coming back late today. Tufts was close against Oregon, but fell. Clearly they are ready to compete. And Georgia completed a phenomenal comeback in the second half to break UC Santa Cruz on Universe to win. And it seems like those 4 teams still have kind of like any path to finish left available to them. I do not know with any confidence who I feel like is going to make the bracket out of those 4 teams: Oregon, Tufts, Georgia, and UC Santa Cruz. The other thing I'm looking for is in Pool D, Texas versus Colorado. They played the Universe Point at Syntex. They've both shown that they're really good teams. They've both shown that they can be vulnerable teams at times, and we didn't get that classic South Central final match because Texas screwed up against WashU in the semis. So this could actually knock Colorado into that 3 Pool D spot, which kind of seemed impossible heading into the tournament, but Texas looked dangerous with the way Zach Slate and Xavier Fusat are playing. And Colorado, as talented as they are they going to bring it off on the defensive end? They didn't against Pittsburgh. What are they going to bring tomorrow against Tough?
Yeah, it was nightmare. I mean, I think someone in the Discord was keeping track of Colorado's second half stats, and I think they went 1 for 7 on break chances in the second half. Just no punch from the D-line offense for Colorado. It was a big problem against Pittsburgh.
I will say, I think I saw that across a lot of teams. A lot of team D-line offense was rocky today.
Well, I think you got to keep in mind, most of the time the D-line offense was getting the disc with worse players going upwind into a 15-mile-per-hour headwind, and there were a lot of players who just simply could not handle the conditions today. Supposed to be less windy tomorrow. I'm hoping that's the case. It will certainly make things, I mean, it's just totally different if it's not windy tomorrow. Final thoughts. And we'll also, if you have questions, now's your chance to get them in the chat. And we'll give some quick reacts here. So get your questions in. Final thoughts on day one.
It was kind of a classic day one in some ways. We saw teams come out with some jitters. We saw the things that make college ultimate great, which is the inconsistency of some of these college kids. I think you got a real sense of which teams were well prepared, though. Which teams came in with their heads on straight and had the prep done. And even teams that struggled to execute, like Pitt in the men's division, like they looked like they had been prepared. And Vermont in the women's division, they looked prepared. And other teams didn't quite look at that level. But I think on day 2, you can get a little bit of a reset. Teams are like, okay, I know what's going on. I know what's up. So there are plenty of things to watch. Vermont in the men's division, like, can they bounce back after today? Like Washington in the men's division, there are many teams that you can look at that it was like wasted opportunities, missed chances. Tufts, Washington, Michigan. There's a litany of teams that are in that bracket. And in the women's division, it really is about at the margins. Which one of those teams can qualify. Northeastern did get a crucial win over Virginia. That's going to help their case, but now there's Georgia in the mix because of their win. So there's a number of different permutations that can happen across the different pools, and a lot of it's going to come down to that third spot.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, really one thing that we're talking about coming into this weekend was how much stratification that there was in the women's division. I don't think my opinion has necessarily fundamentally changed after today. Again, no major upsets yet outside of the Georgia over Northeastern. And then even then, Northeastern was kind of on the fringes of potential contention anyway. UNC looked great. UBC looked good. Carleton, honestly, close loss to UBC, pretty good. And I think Tufts, not a great matchup with Vermont. I'm going to be very curious to see them tomorrow in particular against Oregon.
My note isn't so much about the men's division as the event in general. I think something we noted a year ago in Milwaukee was that the energy seemed to be off. People were a little tentative, getting hype. The level of competition wasn't up. That concern is in the past. I felt like we had an event that was popping off all over the place today. I was right next to the Stanford, Colorado women's game, which was an absolute wonderful contest. And there were 6 other teams that had completely thronged the sidelines and were cheering loud for every moment for both teams. I watched a zone point in a not very competitive game between Georgia and North Carolina on the men's side, where Georgia forced like 70 passes from North Carolina. And in the middle of the point, all of the sidelines were hooting and hollering like it was like a fourth quarter goal line stand at Sanford Stadium for the Georgia football team. And when North Carolina finally scored, they weren't their typical like composed selves. Rutledge Smith let out like a barbaric yawp to have like gotten through it. And like that kind of energy is what I think makes college nationals special. I love that it's back.
College nationals all the way back. Very interesting stuff out there today. Some quick hits from the chat. Charlie Lowe says David Zhao from UW is the truth. Give him his flowers. He definitely UW today, Keith. They really stepped up in a way. I mean, obviously tough day overall because they'd lose, but they were so close to wins.
Yeah, really, like a couple of drops in the end zone were the difference. I mean, they scored the game winner against Texas and had it come back for an injury call that had from one of their players. So, I mean, like that's a heartbreaker for a team. They had a number of opportunities today. They play great defensive pressure. Their offensive line is really exciting, but they just haven't been able to execute on defense. And so many like really close calls for them. Their day could have been totally different, and instead they're 0-2. But I'm sure that they have to feel confident, like, hey, we can go out there and beat Colorado. So they're an interesting team to watch.
Teresa asks, what was your favorite player-on-player matchup today?
I saw it at one point. I was watching in the last round of the day the Georgia upset of Northeastern. At one point, Clara Stewart matched up on Quincy Booth. That was a fun matchup of two just incredible throwers going at it in the backfield. Edward?
Yeah, it's a bit under the radar, but Lucian Knoll, who is an Australian who's attending UNC and is playing with them, is a fantastic defender. And when he matched up with Itai Chang in their game against Oregon this morning, it was fireworks from both of them. It was great.
There's not a zone today, so to be fair, there was limited one-on-one matchups, but we definitely got some good ones out there.
Okay, and then this is also, I was thinking about this a little bit earlier. Tony asks, should Stanford lose to avoid a quarterfinal matchup with UNC? Is there any gaming tomorrow as people start to look ahead to the bracket?
I've always been a proponent that this strategy has too much risk, and thinking you're in control of a situation, it's like, trying to tame an element. You may be messing with something that you don't quite understand, and messing with your team mojo like that to me that has too much inherent cost in a lot of cases, and in an unpredictable way. You don't necessarily know how it's going to manifest itself. You also don't actually know what's going to happen. I mean, chances are you're going to play UNC, but who knows what's going to happen? And you're trying to tease the odds, but you don't really know. So I don't know. I am not a big fan of any trying to game the system in that fashion.
I will also say real quick, I think last year in pool play, UNC and Stanford played, and Stanford gave Pleiades a game. Like, Pleiades ended up winning in the end, but Stanford gave them a game, and I don't think you try and avoid that matchup because I think the Stanford coaches would relish that chance to try and test their team's mettle against the best.
I might rather play them there than the final.
Fair enough.
Plus, you want to bet on Esther Filipek to beat anybody. She's dealing out there.
7 assists versus Colorado. Pretty good.
Okay. Do you see, this is a question in the chat, Sun and Rantoul. Do you still see Colorado as a true title contender in either division? Quick answers here.
Yes.
In either division, yes.
We'll let you think about what that means, Keith.
Yes.
I'm going to say yes, although I feel like my heels are cooling a little bit on the men's team. But I think the women's team, they got the test they needed today against Stanford. They did exactly the thing that they needed to do, which was get tested, pass the test, and they just got to stop throwing it deep away. I mean, they did not adjust well to the wind, I didn't think. There you go. So, all right. So lastly, this is our last question from Will. Any upset predictions for tomorrow? Call anything out that you see coming up.
All right, I'll say it. I think Texas is going to beat
I
Colorado.
knew you were going to say it.
I think it's going to happen. I love the energy they brought to this tournament. I think Zach Slayton and John Clyde are a force, and it just feels like they are going to want it a lot more. I'm projecting a bit there. And it's a fun team I've had fun covering this season, but I think Texas takes it over Colorado in men's.
This also feels a little hedgy, but I'm gonna also go to Pool D. Oregon over Tufts. Trout Waybright is very, very good, and so is Cyrus Lake Field. That is a dangerous team when they are on.
I'm gonna go with Santa Cruz over Oregon in the men's division. They've got them before. Santa Cruz will bounce back today. An anonymous person told me that Santa Cruz is the best team at the tournament when they're down 2 breaks late, and they're the worst team at the tournament when they're up 2 breaks late.
I don't see anything that like I'm in love with, but I would keep an eye on Texas, Pittsburgh in the men's division, and I'm a little worried about Vermont. I think either NC State or Carleton could catch them, and if they're playing like they were playing today, they could end up in a situation where
they only beat Michigan 15-13.
Yeah.
They're gonna have to step up in a big way tomorrow. So
Nobody's calling Georgia over Virginia and women's, huh?
I think that's I mean, that doesn't even feel like enough to happen today.
Oh no, I am still out on Georgia. I'm not buying. I think that was Northeastern laying an egg. I'm not buying Georgia. Sorry to my home state.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. Appreciate you being with us in the Discord. Hit us up if you have any thoughts on today's coverage. We always appreciate hearing from you. deeplook@ultraworld.com to get in touch with me and Keith, and of course, find us in the Discord. That's going to do it for Jenna Weiner, Edward Stevens, Keith Rayner. I am Charlie Eisenhood saying good night, and we'll talk to you tomorrow after day 2 with the quarterfinals set for Sunday. Tomorrow, pool play continues, pre-quarters in the afternoon. It's all streaming live on ultraworld.com. See you there.